Welcome to Midnight Casebook, where every shadow hides a secret and every mystery begs to be solved. Tonight, we unravel the chilling tale of Dark Secrets Father Brown Exposes, a fan-made story paying homage to the brilliance of G.K. Chesterton's legendary detective. We'd love to have you along for this enigmatic journey. Drop a comment to let us know where you're watching from, share your theories, and if you spot any inconsistencies, don't hesitate to call them out. Your keen eyes and sharp minds help us craft even more captivating mysteries in the future. Chapter 1. The Man in the Raincoat. The rain came down in sheets, not drizzle or mist, but a steady grey curtain that blurred the gaslights and turned the city's hard lines into smudged charcoal. In a world where most men duck their heads and curse the sky, Father Brown simply walked. His short figure stooped slightly, a battered umbrella in one hand and a Bible wrapped in oilskin under his arm. He didn't look like he belonged in a place like this. Westwood, a sliver of the city no saint would claim, where the gutters ran black with rainwater and more than rain. He passed neon signs flickering like dying stars, Rose's Lounge, Casino Bellini, loans without questions. Each doorway seemed to breathe heat and menace. Somewhere, a saxophone moaned through a cracked speaker, chasing the scent of gin and cigarettes into the street. And somewhere else, behind a rusted iron grate, a man in a raincoat stood very still, watching the priest as he walked by. Father Brown noticed him, of course. He noticed everything. The raincoat was too new for the rest of the man. Worn boots, threadbare trousers. His hand was in his pocket, not out of the cold, but wrapped around something. The eyes beneath the brim were hard, uncertain. The priest kept walking, but his step slowed ever so slightly. Not from fear, never fear, but from thought. He reached the narrow stoop of St. Dymphna's, a church that time and bullets hadn't managed to close. The old wooden door creaked as he stepped inside. The incense was faint, the warmth slight, but to the weary, it was enough. Father Brown shook off his coat, left his umbrella dripping by the holy water font, and lit the candles on the altar with hands that trembled from age, not nerves. He had just finished saying a silent prayer when she came in. Black gloves, black veil, red lipstick that seemed to scream in the half-light. She moved like someone used to being watched, someone who knew the power of a silhouette in a doorway. But it wasn't seduction she brought into the church. It was something colder, something calculating. "Father," she said, her voice rich with a past, "I need to talk to someone who can keep a secret." He looked up with mild eyes that had seen confessions darker than night. "Confession isn't a secret, my dear. It's the truth whispered, where lies dare not tread." She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I like that. You're not like the others." "No," he said simply. "I suppose I'm not." Her name was Veronica Vale. She claimed her husband was missing. Henry Vale, owner of the Bellini Club downtown. She said he'd gone out 3 nights ago and hadn't come back. No note, no suitcase, just gone, vanished like smoke in an alley. "I think something's happened to him," she said, folding her gloves slowly. "Something bad. And I think the police won't look too hard if I ask." "Why not?" Father Brown asked gently. She gave him a sharp little smile. "Because Henry had friends in dark places, and so do I." "Then perhaps," he said, lighting another candle, "you've come to the right place." She blinked. "You believe me?" "I believe everyone, until I have reason not to. It's easier that way." She stood, glanced once at the confessional, and then turned to go. I'll be at the Bellini most nights. If you find anything, let me know. When she left, the church felt colder. Father Brown didn't go straight to the police. He went to the Bellini. The club was all velvet shadows and smoke, with a piano that never stopped playing blues even when the pianist wasn't there. Gangsters leaned on the railings. Dames drifted from booth to booth, and behind the bar stood a man with a scar so deep it pulled one side of his mouth into a permanent sneer. Father Brown ordered tea. The bartender laughed once, short and cruel. "We don't serve tea, Padre." Father Brown nodded pleasantly. "Then perhaps I'll just speak with the owner." "Vale ain't here. I heard he hasn't been for 3 days." That got a flicker of interest behind the bartender's narrowed eyes. "And who's asking?" "Someone who thinks a man's disappearance deserves more than a shrug and a dirty glass." The bartender leaned in. "You a cop?" Father Brown smiled. "Worse, I'm a priest." A moment later, a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. The man from the raincoat. He wasn't hiding anymore. "You should leave," he said, in a voice like gravel in whiskey. "Funny," said Father Brown, still seated. "You followed me to the church, and now you're here, almost like you wanted me to come." That stopped the man for a moment. Then he leaned down. "You don't know what you're poking into." "I usually don't, until it starts poking back." Father Brown left, without a fight. He never liked scenes, but he'd seen what he needed. The bartender's glance toward the back room when he mentioned Vale's name. The sudden hush when Veronica walked through the club like a ghost who owned the place. The ring on her finger that wasn't her husband's, and the man in the raincoat who watched her like a man watches someone he regrets serving. The next morning, Father Brown went to the police. Detective Harris, a man with tired eyes and a cynical laugh, met him in an office that smelled like stale tobacco and broken promises. "You think Vale's dead?" Harris asked, not looking up from his paperwork. "I think he disappeared in a city where men don't do that, unless someone helps them." "Got any proof?" "No, but I have tea and time." Harris finally looked up. "You're serious, aren't you?" "Only about the things no one else is." The detective shook his head. "You'll get yourself killed, poking around Westwood. That's always the risk, isn't it? Whether it's sin or murder, it rarely likes the light." By the time Father Brown returned to the church, someone had been there. The vestry was ransacked, papers scattered, drawers open, the safe cracked. Nothing was taken, but everything was touched, like a warning, or a message. He sat in the wreckage with a quiet sigh, then picked up a scrap of paper that hadn't been there before. A calling card, blank, except for one phrase: "Saints with secrets are still sinners." The next night, he returned to the Bellini. This time, he wasn't stopped. This time, they wanted him to come. Veronica met him in a private room with red curtains and an untouched bottle of champagne. "You've stirred things up, Father," she said. "You'll make enemies." "I've had worse," he said calmly. "Have you seen your husband?" She hesitated. "No, but someone sent me this." She slid a photograph across the table. It showed Henry Vale, bound to a chair, bruised and bloodied. A newspaper beside him, dated yesterday. "I paid the ransom," she said, "but he's still not back." "Then perhaps it wasn't ransom," Father Brown said, studying the photo. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe they weren't after money. Maybe they wanted something else." The door burst open. Raincoat Man entered. this time with a revolver drawn. He said enough. Father Brown didn't flinch. You're not going to shoot me. You don't know that. I do, he said gently, because if you wanted to, you already would have. Veronica's voice went cold. Do it, Tony. Now. But Tony didn't move. His hand trembled. Father Brown looked at him. You're not her thug. You're her brother. Tony's jaw clenched. She used you to get rid of Vale, the priest continued. She spun some tale about abuse, about escape. But she lied. She always lies. Veronica stood. He's crazy. Father Brown turned to her. You killed your husband 3 days ago, but you needed someone else to take the fall. That's why the photo, why the ransom, to make it look like he was still alive. You can't prove that. I don't need to, not yet, but I will. She laughed. You think anyone in this town cares what a priest says? No, Father Brown said, rising, but they care what a bartender sees. And yours saw you go into the back room with your husband and come out alone. And that scarred bartender, he talks more than you think, especially when I promise his sins won't be judged, at least not by me. Tony looked at Veronica. Is it true? She stared at him. You said you'd do anything. I didn't say I'd be a fool. She reached for the gun, but Tony was faster. He turned it on her, then lowered it slowly. Father Brown stepped forward and took it from his hand. Violence only multiplies the wound. Harris came in minutes later. Someone had tipped him off, someone anonymous, from a payphone near the church. Veronica Vale was arrested for murder. Tony Vale turned state's witness. And Father Brown, soaked in rain and smoke and other people's secrets, walked back to St. Dimphna's. The streets hissed under his shoes. The fog curled like the devil's breath through the alleyways. But in the quiet warmth of the chapel, he knelt before the cross and prayed not just for the dead, but for the living who carried death in their hearts. Sin, he knew, was not just what men did, it was what they justified. And in a city like this, justification came cheap, but the price was always paid in blood. Just Chapter 2. A Confession at Midnight. The rain hadn't let up in 2 days. It came in heavy curtains, sweeping across the cracked windows of St. Dimphna's and pounding the sloped rooftops like a drummer with a grudge. The kind of rain that made even the drunks sober up, just enough to find cover. Father Brown sat alone in the pews, the only sound the ticking of the old chapel clock and the wind sighing through the gaps in the stone walls. Midnight wasn't far off. It was at that hour, the kind of hour when honest men are asleep and liars whisper their truth, that the heavy oak door creaked open. She stepped in like a question mark wrapped in silk. Long coat belted tight at the waist, wide-brimmed hat pulled low, a cigarette glowing between 2 fingers. She didn't cross herself, didn't even blink at the crucifix above the altar, just walked straight down the center aisle, heels clicking like gunshots on the stone floor. I need a confession, she said, voice smooth as aged brandy. Father Brown looked up, blinked behind his round spectacles, and gave a faint nod. That's what the box is for. She exhaled a slow plume of smoke and slid into the confessional, not kneeling, not whispering. Father, forgive me, for I have sinned. His voice from the other side was gentle, dry as old parchment. We all have. But what brings you here at this hour? Trouble, Father. Real trouble. A pause. I think I killed a man. He said nothing for a moment, just let the silence gather like stormwater. Then, you think you did? I didn't pull the trigger, if that's what you're asking. But he's dead, and I'm the reason. Father Brown leaned back, hands resting loosely in his lap. Start from the beginning. It's usually the best place. Her name, she claimed, was Clara Moreau. Said it like it was a borrowed name, one she didn't expect to hold on to for long. She told him about Vincent Caro, a small-time crime boss with big-time ambition. Ran rackets from the Blue Lily Club, bribed judges, owned cops like playing cards. Clara was his girl, or had been. He thought he owned me, she said, but I wasn't something to be bought. So you left him, Father Brown said. She gave a brittle laugh. I tried, but men like Vincent don't let go easy, not when you know what I know. And what is it you know? Her voice dropped. That he was planning something big, something bigger than anything he'd touched. Before, there was a man, new in town, foreign, maybe Russian, maybe worse. They were setting something up together. Guns, Father. A shipment that could arm half the city. And Caro didn't care where they went. Streets, rebels, anyone with enough green. Father Brown's brow furrowed slightly. And you were part of this. I heard things. I saw things. Things I shouldn't have. So I ran. And now he's dead. Father Brown sat quietly. You believe someone killed him because you left? No. Her tone sharpened. I believe someone killed him because I talked. I sent a letter to a cop I used to know, one of the last good ones. Who? Detective Maynard. Works out of the 3rd Precinct. Or did? I haven't heard from him in days. Father Brown murmured something under his breath, then gently closed the confessional screen. Truth is a hard thing to carry, Miss Moreau, but lies weigh more. Stay here. I won't be long. The Blue Lily Club was on Harrow Street, just past the place where the river turned black and the air started to stink of oil and hopelessness. It wasn't the kind of place priests usually visited, but Father Brown had long stopped caring where he was supposed to go. The doorman laughed when he saw him. You lost, Padre? This ain't bingo night. Father Brown smiled mildly. No, I think I've found exactly what I'm looking for. Inside, the club was all smoke and noise, velvet booths, cheap perfume, and a stage lit in dirty blue light. A woman in sequins sang something slow and bitter. At the back, behind a beaded curtain, 2 men played cards. One of them had a badge half tucked into his belt. Detective Rusk. A name Father Brown had heard before, usually followed by a complaint or a curse. Evening, gentlemen, the priest said. As he approached, Rusk looked up, scowled. What the hell's a priest doing here? Looking for a man named Caro, or the ghost of him. The other man, tall, with a scar slicing down one cheek, shifted in his seat. He's dead. Shot in the head 2 nights ago, some alley down in Dockside. And the police? Father Brown asked. Rusk smirked. They'll file it, eventually. Lot of people wanted Caro dead. Father Brown's gaze didn't waver, including you. Rusk stood. Careful, Padre. We don't take kindly to being accused. I didn't accuse, Father Brown said softly. I just ask questions. People tend to answer more than they realize. The man with the scar leaned forward. You're not afraid, are you? Of death? Father Brown shook his head. No, but I worry about the things men do before they get there. He left the club without another word, but his mind was already turning like the gears in a clock that had been wound too tight. A dead gangster, a frightened woman, a detective gone silent, and a city full of shadows that whispered one thing when they meant another. When he got back to St. Dymphna's, Clara was gone. All that remained was her cigarette case, lying on the pew like an afterthought. Inside was a folded scrap of paper, an address, 14 Lorimer Street, midnight. Come alone. Father Brown looked at the chapel clock. 11:30. He arrived 10 minutes early. Lorimer Street was the kind of place where the street lamps didn't bother shining. The buildings leaned together like drunks sharing secrets. Number 14 was a boarding house, once respectable, now a monument to decay. He climbed the stairs slowly, feeling each creak like a warning. The door at the end of the hall was ajar. Light spilled out, dim, flickering, like a candle about to die. Inside, he found Detective Maynard slumped in a chair, a bullet hole neat and small in his temple. No blood on the floor, just on the back wall, sprayed in a dark fan. His badge was still pinned to his coat, and across from him, sitting calmly with her legs crossed, was Clara Moreau. "I told you I killed a man," she said. Father Brown stepped inside, closing the door behind him. This wasn't Caro. No, but it was justice. Father Brown looked at her, quietly. "You used me. I needed someone to listen, someone who wouldn't run to the first badge he saw." And now, she stood, walked to the window, stared out into the night. Maynard was no hero, Father. He was working with Caro. He killed him. Not for truth, for profit. And when I threatened to expose them both, he decided I was a loose end. Father Brown approached the body, gently closing the man's eyes. "So you brought him here." "I told him I wanted to talk, that I'd give him the letter. I even wrote one, full of lies. And then I let him talk first, long enough for him to think I still feared him." She smiled bitterly. "Then I pulled the trigger." Father Brown didn't speak. He looked at the gun on the table, then at the woman. "He was a murderer," she said. "So were you," he replied, quietly. Clara's eyes flared. "You of all people should understand. Doesn't the church teach that evil must be stopped? By redemption, not revenge." Easy words from a man who's never had to bleed. Father Brown sighed. "You think this ends with justice, but this is only the beginning. Lies breed more lies, and blood never washes away blood." Clara turned away. "What now, Father? You can run, or you can confess." "To you?" "No, to the law." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You really think they'll care about the truth?" "No," he said, "but maybe God will." She didn't answer. In the end, she left the room, not in handcuffs, but in silence. Father Brown called the police an hour later, said he'd heard a shot while passing by, said he found the body. They believed him. They always did. He returned to the chapel before dawn, the rain easing into a steady drizzle. The streets were quiet, but the city never truly slept. Somewhere out there, Clara Moreau was walking into the shadows again. Maybe she'd vanish. Maybe she'd confess. Maybe she'd kill again. Father Brown didn't know. He only knew this, that sin was cleverer than crime. It wore better masks, made finer speeches, and always had a reason. But beneath every reason was the same old lie, that we could decide what justice meant without God. And in the city's quiet heart, the little priest lit a candle and prayed not for the dead, but for those still trying to live with what they'd done. Chapter 3. The Choir Boy's Shadow. The rain had a way of making everything feel like penance, each drop a reminder, a whispered confession from the sky. It drummed on the cracked stones of the church courtyard, ran down the stained glass windows in streaks like tears, and soaked the empty streets of Westwood until even the sinners found shelter. Father Brown stood beneath the modest arch of St. Dymphna's, his small figure hunched and still, watching the city through the mist like a man waiting for something he already knew would come. It always did. In this part of the city, trouble had a habit of arriving quietly, like a choir boy who'd seen too much. It was almost midnight when the knock came, not on the rectory door, but on the church's old wooden side gate. Hesitant, uneven, a rhythm more like pleading than demand. Father Brown answered it himself, as he always did, and found a boy there, wet, shivering, no older than 14, his choir robe clinging to him like a secret he couldn't shake. His name was Paulie Finch, and he had been missing for 2 days. The city had not noticed. "Father," he said, voice shaking, "I need to confess." Father Brown led him inside, gave him a blanket, some tea, and time. The boy didn't speak again until the bells struck midnight, and even then the words came like broken glass, sharp, slow, painful. "There was blood," Paulie whispered. "So much blood." Father Brown didn't flinch. "Whose?" "I don't know," the boy said. "He had a mask. I ran. I didn't mean to. I saw him. I saw what he did. Then I hid. I didn't go home. I couldn't." The priest placed a hand on his shoulder. "Tell me what you saw, Paulie." "It was behind the music hall. I went out after practice. Sometimes I stay late. Sister Agnes lets me. She says it helps my voice. I was walking back, and I cut through the alley near Bessemer Street. That's when I saw it. A man. He had this long coat and a mask, like an old play, all pale and smiling. He was standing over someone. There was a knife. I think the person on the ground was already dead." Father Brown was quiet for a moment, then spoke gently. "Why didn't you go to the police?" Paulie looked up, eyes wide, with something between fear and shame. "Because I know who the mask belonged to." The rain outside seemed to still for a moment, as if the city itself were holding its breath. "It belongs to Mr. Thatch, the music teacher." Father Brown had met Thatch once or twice. Tall, thin, wore gloves even in summer, spoke in long, polished sentences, and watched people the way a snake might watch a bird cage. Not cruel exactly, but empty. The kind of man who smiled too much without ever being warm. "Did you see his face?" Father Brown asked. "No, but the mask. He keeps it in his office. He says it's from a Commedia dell'arte play. He showed it to us once. No one else has one like that. I swear it." Father Brown nodded slowly. "And you believe he killed someone?" Paulie hesitated. "I don't know. He saw me. I think he saw me. I've been hiding since." The priest poured more tea. "Then we'll see what light the morning brings." But light in this city didn't come easily. It had to fight its way through grime and smoke and silence. By morning, the music hall was locked up, but that didn't stop Father Brown. He'd learned long ago that locked doors were often less solid than locked hearts. Inside, the place smelled of varnish and dust. The echoes of past performances still lingered in the rafters like ghosts waiting for applause. He found the office, opened with a simple skeleton key. Thatch's world was one of order. Sheet music filed with military precision, pens arranged like soldiers, photographs of composers staring sternly from the walls. And there, on the shelf behind the desk, was the mask. Father Brown picked it up carefully. Porcelain, finely painted, with a grotesque grin stretched ear to ear. He turned it over, examined the faint bloodstain near the strap. Not visible at first, but there. Enough. He left the office without touching anything else. The police, when informed, were polite but dismissive. Detective Rusk again, fat, sweating, leaning back in his chair like the world was an ugly movie he'd seen too many times. Kid says he saw a man in a mask, Rusk said, scratching his neck. Doesn't mean a thing. Could have been a hobo, could have been a drunk. There was blood on the mask, Father Brown said, simply. Then maybe Thatch cut himself shaving. You shave with a theatrical dagger, detective? Rusk narrowed his eyes. You priests think you're clever, but this isn't a pulpit. You want a case? Bring me a body. That came sooner than expected. 2 days later, a janitor found it behind the music hall, wedged under broken crates, covered with a tarp and a few half-hearted prayers. A man in a cheap grey suit, stabbed twice in the chest. No ID, no witnesses, just blood, decay, and a faint smell of cheap cologne. But Father Brown saw what others missed. A callus on the man's right index finger, ink stains on the left. A small leather notebook, hidden in the jacket lining, filled with notations and codes that looked like schedules. And tucked in the back, a faded program from St. Dymphna's choir recital, dated 2 weeks ago. The dead man had been watching. Someone, maybe more than one. Father Brown returned to the church that night, where Paulie waited in the shadows, like a memory too sharp to forget. It was Thatch, the boy said again. I know it. Father Brown didn't answer directly. He looked instead at the choir loft, at the empty benches where children sat and sang and dreamed of innocence. Do you remember anything else? A sound, a word, anything unusual? Paulie frowned, thinking. There was a smell, something sharp, like chemicals. Cologne? No, sharper, like paint thinner, but sweet. Father Brown nodded, the gears turning. He left the boy in the chapel and made his way through the back alleys toward a place called Verno's, a junk shop by name, but more a meeting place for the city's unwanted truths. Verno himself was blind in one eye, mean in both, but he knew things. I'm looking for information, Father Brown said as he stepped inside. Verno chuckled, aren't we all? About a man with a mask and a scent like turpentine and cherries. That made the old man pause. You're talking about Piero, he muttered. He used to be part of Thatch's circle, back when the music hall did real shows. Thatch ran the whole thing. Wasn't just kids back then. They did avant-garde stuff, mass theatre, Italian pieces, all that. What happened? Verno spat. One night, a girl died. Fell from the catwalk. They said it was an accident, but the company folded fast after that. Piero disappeared. Thatch kept quiet. Always wondered about that. Father Brown thanked him and left. The pieces were coming together now, sharper than glass and just as dangerous. The dead man had been a private eye, hired by someone, maybe a parent, maybe an old actor, to watch Thatch. The mask, the chemicals, the echo of a long-buried tragedy. And the choir boy caught in the middle. That night, he waited until the music hall was empty, then returned. This time, he brought no keys, just questions. He found Thatch in the costume room, cataloguing props with the calm of a man rearranging a crime scene. He didn't look surprised. I knew you'd come, Thatch said. I usually do. Thatch gestured to the masks on the wall. You know what the Greeks believed. that truth can only be spoken from behind a mask, that without it, men lie. And yet, Father Brown said, stepping forward, you wore one to kill. Thatch smiled faintly. Is that what Paulie told you? No, Father Brown said. The blood did. They stood there, two men in a room of ghosts. You think you understand me? Thatch asked. I understand that long ago, a girl died, and someone covered it up. She fell, Thatch said flatly. No, Father Brown said softly. She was pushed, and Piero saw it. Thatch's hands clenched. He was blackmailing you, Father Brown continued. You paid for a while, then stopped. And when he came back, you killed him. And you would have killed the boy too, if he'd gotten a better look. I spared him. No, Father Brown said. You spared yourself. Paulie reminded you of what you used to be, of what you still pretend to be. Thatch lunged then, not with a weapon, but with rage. His hand curled into a fist, but Father Brown didn't flinch. He simply raised a hand. You won't find redemption in silence, Mr. Thatch, only damnation. The police arrived soon after. This time, they listened. Thatch was arrested. Paulie was safe. The choir sang again the next week. A little quieter, a little sadder. But they sang. Father Brown stood alone in the chapel afterward, the notes echoing like prayers lost in time. Sin, he thought, was never just in the crime. It was in the silence that followed. In the shadows, men left behind, hoping they'd stay buried. But shadows, like choir boys, had voices too. And sometimes they sang. Chapter 4. Smoke over St. Elmo's. The fire started just after 2 in the morning. A crackle in the silence, a glow that pulsed behind the boarded windows of St. Elmo's like a sick heartbeat. The chapel had been abandoned for years, long before the city swallowed its neighborhood in liquor, rackets, and rot. But fire doesn't care for history, and neither do the men who strike the match. The blaze lit up the wet streets of the Red Lantern district, painting the alleys gold and orange, and throwing long, flickering shadows against the faces of the silent crowd that gathered to watch it die. And in the middle of them stood Father Brown, his collar darkened by smoke, his face turned toward the flames, not with horror or surprise, but something closer to quiet recognition. By the time the firemen got there, the roof had collapsed, and half the stained glass had burst out onto the street like colored teeth. The crowd was thinning, muttering theories, shaking heads, lighting cigarettes with the kind of casual indifference that only city nights and sin can breed. Father Brown moved against the tide, stepped through the barrier tape, and crouched at the edge of the wreckage. He reached down and picked up something blackened and curled, a scrap of white linen, scorched but not consumed. He turned it over in his hand, gently brushing away the ash. It was a choir robe, small, child-sized. That was when he heard her voice behind him. Low, velvet-thick, smooth, enough to wrap around a lie and make it feel like truth. You're looking in the wrong place, Father. That church has been dead a long time. He turned to see her, tall, tailored in a rain-slicked trench coat, gloves the color of dried blood. She had eyes like green smoke and a mouth too sharp to be kind. She smiled when she saw she'd startled him, but his face didn't change. Perhaps, he said, but even the dead deserve a moment. Most people wouldn't care, she said, lighting a cigarette with a long match that flared like a miniature funeral pyre. Not for a dump like St. Elmo's, then you must not be most people. She smirked, exhaled smoke through her nose, like a dragon that preferred gin to gold. Name's Delilah Cross. You might say I'm in real estate, or reclamation, if you want to make it sound poetic. I buy things people throw away, churches mostly. This one was going to be mine, until someone decided to light it up. He studied her. You already bought it? I made an offer. The diocese never answered. Maybe they were praying about it. Or maybe someone wanted to stop the sale, he said softly. Her smile twitched. You think this was arson? I think people rarely burn buildings for no reason. And never churches. Not unless they're burning something else along with it. She glanced at the wreckage, then back at him. You're not like the other priests. No, he said. I listen. And he did. Later that morning, when the crowd had gone and the ashes cooled, he listened to what the fire didn't say. The chapel hadn't burned evenly. The blaze had started near the sacristy. Old wood, yes, but someone had helped it along. An accelerant, likely poured behind the altar. He found a melted tin flask with a silver inlay, expensive, not something left by a squatter. And there was something else beneath the soot, a gold chain, broken, still bearing a tiny crucifix. He pocketed it gently, not as evidence, but as memory. Back at St. Dymphna's, the phone rang just as he was taking off his coat. The voice on the other end was tight, nervous, used to giving orders, but not to priests. This is Captain Morelli, 3rd Precinct. I heard you were snooping around St. Elmo's. That true? I was there when it burned, Father Brown said mildly. Then maybe you should come down here. Someone wants to talk to you. He arrived 20 minutes later, umbrella dripping on the floor of a station that stank of sweat and despair. In an interrogation room sat a boy, no older than 16, skinny, with haunted eyes and soot under his fingernails. Morelli waved toward the glass. Kid says he saw someone start the fire. Won't talk to anyone else. Says he wants you. Father Brown stepped inside, closed the door quietly, and sat across from the boy. Hello, he said. The boy's hands trembled in his lap. You're the priest. From Dymphna's, I am. And you? Danny, the boy said. Danny Whalen. I used to sing at St. Elmo's. Father Brown nodded. You were there the night it burned. I saw the man, Danny said. He was tall, black coat, gloves. He poured something from a can. I didn't see his face. But you saw enough to be afraid. Danny nodded. Father Brown studied him. You've been hiding? Yeah. In the old train yard. I didn't want to go to the cops. They don't care about kids like me. Father Brown glanced through the glass at Morelli. They care more than they admit, but less than they should. He looked back at the boy. Did you see anything else? Danny hesitated. Then from his coat, he pulled out something wrapped in cloth. He placed it on the table and unfolded it. A book, old, scorched on the edges. A hymnal. But inside were no hymns, just names, dozens of them, in looping cursive, with dates, symbols, notes, payments. Some entries were marked with a cross, others had a dollar amount, and a few were blacked out entirely. Father Brown's voice was quiet. This isn't a church record. It's a ledger. Yeah, Danny said. The priest at St. Elmo's, Father Kearney, he kept it. Said it was for donations, but I think it was blackmail. The pages told a grim story. Parishioners paying for silence, names connected to gambling, affairs, even violence. And at the bottom, on the last page, scrawled in a different hand, was the name Delilah Cross. Father Brown closed the book. This is what the fire was meant to destroy. She came to the chapel a week ago, Danny said. Talked to Kearney. I heard them arguing. What about? She said he owed her, that she helped him cover something. She wanted the land, said he'd lose more than just the church if he didn't sell. Did he? Danny nodded. He left 2 days ago. No one's seen him since. Father Brown left the station with the book wrapped in oilcloth and the weight of sin heavy on his shoulders. He knew where to go next. Delilah's office was above a jazz club, thick with smoke and heavy with secrets. She looked up when he walked in, lips twitching into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Back so soon, Father? I found your name in a dead man's book. She didn't blink. That's a broad accusation. It's not an accusation. It's a confession, just not yours. She rose slowly. You don't understand what St. Elmo's was. That place was poison. Father Kearney, he was no saint. None of us are, Father Brown said, but sin is never purified by fire, only revealed. You're a clever man, Father, but you're playing in a world you don't belong to. I belong where the truth is, he said. And right now, the truth is that someone burned a church to hide a book that named you, and Kearney is missing. She leaned close. If you know what's good for you, you'll let this go. He looked at her calmly. I've never been very good. At that, she laughed, cold and tired. I didn't kill him. I just reminded him what he owed me. And now he's vanished. I didn't start that fire either. No, Father Brown said, but you know who did. Her face tightened. Then she turned away, poured a drink, and said nothing. That night, a tip led the police to an apartment across town. Inside, they found Father Kearney, dead, strangled, stuffed into a trunk beneath a broken crucifix. In his pocket was a check from Delilah, cross, dated the day he vanished. She was arrested the next morning, charged with obstruction, blackmail, and conspiracy, not murder. That charge went to someone else, her business partner, a man named Maddox, who had fingerprints on the can of kerosene and a record longer than a funeral march. The case made the papers for a week. Then the city forgot. Father Brown didn't. He stood once more before the burned husk of St. Elmo's, watching smoke curl into the sky. The choir, robe, the hymnal, the broken cross, each a symbol of a sin not washed away, but burned too late. Sin, he thought, was not in the flames, but in the silence that preceded them, in the way men justified the unholy with whispers and checks and quiet threats. St. Elmo's hadn't died in fire. It had been dying for years. Chapter 5. The Widow's Envelope. The rain was falling like God's own judgment, hammering down in sharp, slanted sheets that turned the streetlights into halos of golden smear and the gutters into confessionals for the city's sins. Father Brown walked with his shoulders hunched beneath a shapeless brown coat, his hat tilted just enough to keep the worst of the weather off his spectacles. Even so, water dripped from his sleeves and down his collar, pooling in his shoes with every step. But he didn't complain. A little discomfort was often the doorway to deeper truths. He was halfway down Vesper Street, where the neon signs still fought a losing war with the darkness, when he heard the voice, a woman's, low and soft and sharp at the edges. She was waiting in the alcove of a shuttered tobacconist, her figure slender and sculpted in shadow, a veil clinging to her like smoke. "Father," she said, stepping out, where the light could catch her cheekbones and the gleam of something hard behind her eyes. "I've come to make a confession." "You've come to make a move," Father Brown corrected gently. "But I'm still listening." She didn't bristle. She only smiled, that tired, too-perfect smile that women wore when they were used to watching men fall apart. "My name is Lydia Vane," she said. "My husband was Charles Vane." Father Brown didn't blink. "The man found dead in his penthouse last Thursday?" "That's the one," she said, wrapping her arms around herself, more for effect than for warmth. "They said it was suicide. A gun, one shot to the temple. Clean, neat. But it wasn't. It wasn't suicide." He tilted his head. "And why do you think that?" "Because Charlie was many things, Father. Cruel, paranoid, slippery as a wet eel. But he wasn't suicidal. He was obsessed with control. Even in death, he'd want to win." Father Brown didn't reply immediately. He let the rain talk for a moment, its steady rhythm tapping against the sidewalk, like a metronome counting down to a lie. "Then why did he leave you everything?" he asked at last. "The apartment, the investments, the cars?" She smiled again, colder this time. "Because that was our arrangement. I gave him loyalty. He gave me security. But the real fortune, that's still hidden. And I think someone killed him looking for it." "Do you have any evidence?" "Only this." She reached into her coat and handed him a plain envelope. No name, no seal, only a heavy feel and the faint scent of lavender and smoke. "He left this in the safe. Not with the will, not with the jewelry. Just this. I haven't opened it. Not yet." Father Brown held it for a moment, then tucked it into his pocket. "I'll look into it." "You'd better," she said, stepping back into the shadows. "Because if you don't find out who killed him, I might have to." St. Dymphna's was dark when he returned, the candles snuffed and the stone walls cool with the memory of prayer. He lit a lamp in his study and placed the envelope on the desk like a relic from some unholy mass. When he opened it, the contents were surprisingly mundane: a sheet of plain paper, typed, and a photograph. The letter read, "If anything happens to me, it won't be by my own hand. If you're reading this, someone's gotten close. Trust no one, not the police, not Lydia, not the church. They all have a price. But someone needs to know the truth about what happened at St. Severin's. The boy, the ledger. It's all there, hidden in the walls. Tell Father Brown. He's the only one who might understand." The photograph was old, sepia-toned, creased at the corners. It showed a younger Charles Vane, barely 20, dressed in a cassock. Beside him was another boy, thinner, darker, eyes sunken with guilt. Behind them, a sign carved in wood, St. Severin's Home for Boys. Father Brown sat back slowly. St. Severin's had been shut down 15 years ago. Abuse scandals, financial irregularities, the kind of rot that didn't just smell, but infected everything it touched. Vane had once been a seminarian. That part he remembered now, vaguely, from a headline. Left the church, claimed a crisis of faith, more likely a crisis of exposure. The next day, he went to the archives. Dusty shelves, forgotten files, the ghosts of bureaucrats whispering through carbon copies and ledger slips. He found the records for St. Severin's, closed by court order, under investigation, never reopened. But one thing stood out. A name. Brother Thomas Rigg, bookkeeper, disappeared 2 weeks before the scandal broke. Father Brown left the archives and headed toward Dockside, where the city forgot to pretend. There, in a third-rate diner that sold coffee and bad advice, he found someone who remembered Rig, a drunk named Milo, eyes like pinholes and breath like rust. Rig, he slurred. Yeah, I knew him. Always sweatin', always writin' stuff. Down. He was scared near the end. Said someone was going to burn the whole thing down, boys and all. Did he say who? Just the vain kid, Milo whispered. Said he wasn't like the others. Said he'd learned to hide evil behind clean nails and a smile. Father Brown left him sleeping on the counter and walked out into the wet evening. The city pulsed under flickering lights. Somewhere, someone had killed Charles Vane, not out of rage, but out of fear. The kind of fear that grows in old walls and ledgers buried in stone. Back at the church, Lydia was waiting for him. She looked different now. Less mystery, more pressure. Her gloves were gone. Her hands clasped too tightly. You read it, didn't you? She asked. Yes, he said simply. And? And your husband was not the victim of a crime of passion. He was part of a secret, and someone was afraid he'd tell it. She moved closer. That ledger, the one he mentioned. If you find it. It's not for money, he interrupted gently. It's a record of sin. Her mouth twisted. You think sin scares me, Father? No, he said. But truth might. That night, he broke into St. Severin's. The building had been condemned, but it still stood. Blackened windows, stone worn by time and cruelty. He entered through a broken window and moved through the halls like a ghost returning to its grave. The air was thick with mold and memory. He found the chapel. Behind the altar, the wall had been patched differently. He tapped it, heard the hollow echo. Inside, he pried loose the stone and found a tin box. Inside the box, a ledger, names, dates, payments, victims, and 3 names circled in red ink. Charles Vane, Thomas Rig, Father Alton. He barely had time to react when the flashlight hit him square in the eyes. Well, said a voice sharp and dry, look who decided to go digging. Detective Rusk, always just one step away from dirty. This time, he was fully immersed. Step away from the box, Padre. Father Brown did not move. You knew. I knew enough. Enough to know Vane wasn't supposed to die yet. He had his uses, and enough to know you shouldn't be alive. Then why talk? Rusk chuckled. Because I want you to understand what's about to happen. Because this city doesn't run on justice. It runs on fear. And ledger or not, you won't change that. No, said Father Brown, but perhaps your conscience might. Rusk raised the gun. My what? The part of you that still hears your mother's voice when you lie, the part that still flinches at a child's cry. You're not gone yet, detective, but you're close. Something flickered in Rusk's eyes, just for a second. Then came the click of a safety, another voice. Drop it, Rusk. Lydia stood behind him, holding a smaller pistol with both hands. Her arms shook, but her eyes didn't blink. You lied to me, she said. Vane never had the money, did he? It was never about inheritance. It was about leverage. Put the gun down, Lydia, Rusk said. You put yours down first. He didn't, but he also didn't fire. Father Brown stepped between them. Enough, he said. You've both sinned enough for a lifetime. But there's still time to stop it from becoming a death sentence. In the end, Rusk didn't pull the trigger. Neither did Lydia. The ledger went to the papers. 12 men were arrested. Vane's empire crumbled not from an explosion, but from exposure, and Street Severin's long closed, became a monument to the danger of secrets whispered in the dark. Lydia disappeared, maybe to Europe, maybe to a grave of her own making. Father Brown didn't chase her. He only lit a candle, placed the broken envelope beside the altar, and prayed, not for Vane, but for the children whose names filled the ledger. Because in the end, the real crime wasn't the bullet, it was the silence that came before it, and the souls who traded truth for comfort, again and again. The city moved on, it always did, but somewhere beneath the rain-slicked streets, beneath the smoke and the neon, the truth had been spoken. And sometimes that was enough. Chapter 6. A knock on the vestry door. The rain hadn't let up for 3 days. It painted the city in streaks of oil and sorrow, running down the brick faces of old buildings like tears shed too late. Somewhere beyond the veil of fog and neon, men were killing each other over what they called business, and women were lying to save their souls, or at least their skins. The gutters of Westwood coughed up more secrets than the confessionals ever could, but the little church on Mercer Street still stood, still stubbornly lit its candles, and still opened its doors to anyone willing to knock. Most nights, the knock never came, but that night it did. A knock at the vestry door, soft, almost polite, but not hesitant. Father Brown was in the back, drying his hands from washing the chalice, when he heard it. He paused, glanced at the clock. It was almost midnight. Nothing good ever arrived at midnight. He moved through the quiet corridor, past worn wooden pews and flickering votives, and opened the door. She stood there in a trench coat, dark as dried blood, her hair pinned tight like she was afraid it might reveal something she wasn't ready to share. Her eyes were green and tired, and her lipstick had been touched up in a hurry. She smelled like rain, cigarettes, and expensive trouble. "Father Brown?" she asked. He nodded. "Come in." She did, not glancing over her shoulder, though he could feel her paranoia trailing her like a second shadow. "My name is Isabel Crane," she said. "My brother is missing." Father Brown motioned to the chair by the vestry stove, poured tea from the battered pot he kept for nights like this. "Tell me about him." "His name's Michael. He's 28. Grew up around here, sang in the choir until he was 16. Then things shifted. He ran with the wrong people, got in over his head. I tried to keep him clean. I tried." Her voice faltered, then hardened. "He got into something big last month. He said he'd seen something he shouldn't have. He was scared. Kept saying if anything happened, I should go to you." "To me?" She pulled a crumpled envelope from her coat. "He left this in my apartment. Addressed to you, no stamp, just your name." Father Brown took the envelope, unfolded the page. The handwriting was jagged, slanted, the letters written like they were trying to outrun something. The note was short. "Father, if you're reading this, I'm already gone or close enough. They're watching me. I found out what happened to Beckett, what they did to him. It wasn't an accident. It was punishment. There's a ledger, code names, times, locations. It's in the wall, behind the altar at the Stag. I was trying to do the right thing for once. Tell Isabel I'm sorry." Father Brown's brows lifted ever so slightly. The Stag was a bar, a gangster den masquerading as a jazz club, frequented by politicians, thugs, and anyone who could afford to keep a secret on the rocks. Beckett had been a city councilman found drowned in the river 2 weeks ago. The official line was accidental death, slipped on the dock, but no one believed it, not even the cops. "Have you told the police?" he asked. Isabel scoffed. "They think Michael's just another junkie who skipped town. They don't care. But you have a reputation. You find the truth, even when it doesn't want to be found." He watched her, her hands tight, around her teacup, her shoulders squared like a woman used to hearing no and pushing past it anyway. "I'll look into it," he said. The Stag sat like a black jewel in the rotten crown of the West End, its sign flickering above the rain-slick pavement, a stag's head framed in neon antlers. Father Brown entered just past 1, weaving through a lobby thick with smoke and perfume. The music was too smooth, too calculated, a silk screen to hide the grit underneath. Men in tailored suits leaned at the bar, eyes sharp, fingers loitering near shoulder holsters. A singer crooned into a red velvet microphone, her smile as fake as her lashes. He didn't order a drink, just walked past the booths like he belonged until a large man in a tight suit blocked his path. "Club's full, Father. Try Sunday Mass." Father Brown peered up at him mildly. "I hear there's a ledger hidden in your altar." The bouncer blinked. "What? You do have an altar, don't you? Every shrine needs one, especially the kind where offerings are paid in silence." The man scowled. "You're funny." "No," Father Brown said. "I'm serious. And I'd like to speak to whoever's pretending to run this place." That earned him a shove into a side room and a chair beneath a swinging bulb. He waited. 5 minutes later, a man entered with a cigarette dangling from his lips and a face like a closed door. He wore a grey suit too smooth for his bulk, and his fingers were stained with ink and old violence. "Name's Darius Kane," he said. "I run the books." "Then you're the man I need." Kane sat across from him. "You think walking in here in your collar gives you armor?" "No," Father Brown said. "It gives me a habit of listening." Kane squinted. "What are you after?" "A boy, Michael Crane, and a dead man named Beckett." Kane's eyes twitched just once. "Crane's gone. Too bad. Junkies vanish all the time. And Beckett? Slipped. Bad weather? Bad luck." Father Brown leaned forward. "No, he was thrown because he threatened to pull your ledger into the light, and now Michael's done the same." Kane exhaled smoke through his nose. "You think I care what you believe? I think you're scared. Not of me, but of what's been written down." Kane's jaw tightened. "You don't know the game, priest. You're a lamb in a wolf den." Father Brown smiled faintly. "Wolves think that until the lamb opens its mouth." Later that night, Father Brown returned to the Stag through a side alley. The fire escape led to the attic, and the attic led to the rafters. He moved like a ghost above the empty bar, watching the shadows shift below. The altar Kane had mocked was more real than he admitted. An old back room with a cross nailed upside down on the brick and a drawer beneath it. Inside, hidden behind crumbling plaster, he found it. A ledger. Slim, black leather, filled with initials and coded dates. Beckett's name was there. So was Michael Crane's. Father Brown took it and left. He returned to St. Dimphna's, the book wrapped in linen, the rain still falling outside like a penance unending. He knew now that Kane had lied about the ledger, about Beckett, about the game, and he knew something else. Michael wasn't dead. The ledger had an entry for him, dated 3 days ago. Transfer. Crane. Seller. It was Isabel who solved the rest. She burst into the vestry an hour before dawn, holding a photograph From Michael's things, a building, a boarded basement door with a symbol spray-painted on it, a stag's head. "They own the warehouse on Bleecker," she said. "He said if anything ever happened, that's where they'd take him." Father Brown went alone. The warehouse was dead quiet, lit only by the pale reflection of streetlights on wet concrete. Inside, the air smelled of rust and secrets. He found the stairs, moved down into the dark, and saw the shape slumped in the corner. Michael, alive, barely, bound and gagged, bruised but breathing. He freed the boy, helped him up, and that was when Kane stepped out of the shadows with a pistol and a sneer. "I warned you," he said. "You should have walked away." "I rarely do," Father Brown replied. "You think this ledger changes anything?" "It already has, because now you have to kill me. And him? And then what? How many more will come looking?" Kane's grip tightened. "I've buried bigger than you." "But not better," Father Brown said quietly. "That's the problem with sin, Mr. Kane. It never knows when to stop. It always assumes there's time for one more lie, one more body." Kane hesitated. Sirens echoed outside. "You called the cops?" he growled. "No," said Father Brown. "She did." Isabel stepped into the light, her coat soaked, her eyes blazing. Kane turned the gun, but she was already moving, slamming a pipe into his arm. The gun clattered. Father Brown caught it, held it, awkwardly. "I don't like these," he muttered, then tossed it aside. The cops came. Rusk, begrudging and bleary-eyed, took statements with the grace of a man who knew he was losing control of his kingdom. Kane went down. So did half his crew. The ledger made sure of that. Michael recovered, slowly. Isabel moved away, far from the city, the blood, the rain, and Father Brown, as always, stayed. He lit candles, mended robes, whispered absolutions over shoulders, trembling with guilt. But sometimes, late at night, he stared at the vestry door and waited for the next knock. Because in Westwood, redemption came softly, often disguised as trouble, and never without a cost. Chapter 7. Blood in the Baptismal Font. The first thing Father Brown noticed that morning was the smell, thick, metallic, sharp enough to cut through the old incense and candle wax that usually perfumed St. Dymphna's. It crept into the nave like an unwelcome prayer, lingered in the air as if daring him to ignore it. He didn't. He never did. The second thing he noticed was the silence. St. Dymphna's was never loud, but this quiet was different. Not reverent, tense, waiting. And then there was the third thing, the glint of red in the marble font, just beneath the carved lid of the baptismal bowl. Blood. It clung to the water like oil, a single drop at first, then more, blooming in faint streaks across the white stone. It hadn't been there the night before. Father Brown knew. He had closed the doors himself, checked the locks, walked the aisle like he always did before sleep. Now, someone had broken the silence with something ugly, something human. He leaned in, eyes calm behind his round spectacles, and gently lifted the lid. Inside was a hand. Just a hand. Severed cleanly at the wrist, pale and bloodless now, except where it had spilled into the font. A woman's hand, judging by the thin fingers and manicured nails, chipped with what might have once been red polish. There was a ring, gold, with a black onyx stone, etched with the faint outline of a serpent. Father Brown didn't recoil. He rarely did. Instead, he looked around the chapel, noting the faint scuff marks on the tile near the font, the light dust displaced along the front pew, the scent of perfume still clinging faintly to the air, not the scent of devotion, something more expensive, artificial, calculated. By mid-morning, the police were crawling through the church, their flashbulbs popping like distant thunder. Detective Morelli, always rumpled and half-sweating into his tie, walked up to the priest with a look halfway between fatigue and accusation. "I thought your job was saving souls," he muttered, "not stacking body parts." Father Brown offered a small, weary smile. "We all do what we can with the messes left behind." Morelli grunted. "No ID yet. No head, no purse, no wallet, just a hand in holy water. What kind of sick freak?" "One with a message," Father Brown said quietly. Morelli frowned. "What message?" Father Brown looked again at the font. "That someone wants to turn baptism into blasphemy." An hour later, a name came in. The fingerprints were in the system. The hand belonged to Carla Devine, singer at the Red Moon Lounge. Late 20s. Known associates included small-time criminals, the kind who thought muscle meant influence and used it to collect debts and lose poker games. She'd gone missing 2 nights ago. Her last known sighting was walking out of the lounge with a man in a dark coat. No name, no face, just a coat. Father Brown paid the lounge a visit before sunset. The Red Moon crouched in the crook of Banner Street like a fox waiting to pounce. Sleek, velvet-lined, the kind of place where everyone was lying, but no one admitted it. Inside, the smoke hung heavy, and the band was already warming up. Carla Devine's absence was noted only in whispers, and even those were rare. No one liked to dwell on the vanished. Not in a city like this. It drew attention. The club's manager, Julian Kearse, wore too much cologne and not enough conscience. He met Father Brown at the back of the lounge, leaning on his cane, like a man used to leaning on everything but the truth. "Can't say I know what happened to Carla," he said, his voice slick and false. "Sweet girl. Kept her nose mostly clean. She had a habit of making enemies. She had a habit of talking back." He flashed a grin. "But that's hardly a sin, is it, Father?" "No," Father Brown said, "but pride often is." Kearse narrowed his eyes. "You think one of us did it? I think someone silenced her, and they wanted her silence to be loud." That night, as Father Brown returned to the rectory, he found an envelope slipped under the vestry door. No name, just a single sheet of paper folded once. On it, typed in clean, impersonal letters. "She wasn't the first. She won't be the last. The serpent watches from the pulpit. Follow the ring." He took the ring from the drawer, examined it again. The serpent was faint, but its eyes were tiny, emeralds. Nothing about it was ordinary. He'd seen something similar before, in a different kind of case. A cult. Not robes and sacrifices, but money, power, control. Sin wrapped in sanctimony. A group that used religious iconography to mask influence. A secret society that once recruited from the clergy itself. The Order of St. Euphrasia. Long buried, or so he had thought. The next day, he visited the cathedral archives and spoke to Sister Miriam, a historian with the patience of a saint and the memory of a criminal court stenographer. "Euphrasia," she said, frowning. "They were active up through the late 30s. Private rituals, donations in exchange for absolutions, clerical immunity sold like poker chips. Cardinal Reynard shut them down, publicly. Privately, they went underground. We stopped hearing their name, but symbols kept surfacing. That ring," she pointed to the photograph he brought, was often a signifier, not proof of membership, but of loyalty. Then someone's resurrected them. She said nothing, but her expression said enough. The next knock came that night. A woman, mid-30s, blonde hair tied back, eyes ringed with sleeplessness. She wore a grey coat and gloves, though the night was warm. She introduced herself as Moira Lansing, Carla Devine's roommate. She was scared, Moira said, sitting on the pew, her hands clutching a worn rosary. Not of some creep in an alley, something bigger. She said she found out things about the club, about the men behind it. What kind of things? She didn't say, only that if anything happened to her, to go to you. Why me? Because, Moira said, she said you still believed in sin. And that scared the people who didn't. Father Brown didn't ask her to stay. He simply offered her sanctuary and locked the doors. That night, someone tried to break in. A shadow moved past the rectory window, too quiet for a drunk, too swift for a thief. Father Brown stepped out with a flashlight, calm, methodical. He saw the figure vanish behind the chapel and followed without a sound. When he reached the alley, the man was waiting for him. "You're not what I expected," the man said. He was tall, lean, eyes like broken glass, and a scar that split his cheek in two. "No," Father Brown said, "I rarely am." The man stepped forward, not threatening, but purposeful. "You have something that doesn't belong to you. I have nothing but questions." "And that ring?" Father Brown smiled. "The ring was left in my care." "Then consider this mercy. Forget what you've seen, or we baptize the city in more than blood." The man turned and vanished into the mist. Father Brown didn't follow. The next morning, Moira was gone. No note, no sign of forced entry, just an empty bed and a faint trace of perfume. The police chalked it up to nerves. Father Brown knew better. She had vanished the same way Carla had, without noise. Only this time, there would be no hand in the font. They didn't need to make another statement, but they made a mistake. They forgot that sin, once awakened, rarely goes back to sleep. Father Brown returned to the Red Moon Lounge that night, not as a priest, but as a presence. He sat at the bar, ordered nothing, said nothing. He simply watched. And in watching, he saw everything. Julian Kearse had a nervous tic. He tapped his cane 3 times whenever someone new came in. But when a man in a grey suit entered near closing, Kearse tapped twice. It meant something, a signal. The man was led to a private room beneath the stage. Father Brown followed at a distance, down a narrow corridor lined with red wallpaper and the smell of decay. At the end was a door with no handle, only a small cross carved into the wood. He knocked once. The door opened. A voice spoke from inside. "You're early." Father Brown stepped in. 3 men looked up, Kearse, the scarred man, and a third, older, dressed in vestments not worn in decades, a ring on his finger matching the one from the font. "You're not the courier," the old man said. "No," Father Brown replied. "I'm the consequence." They moved for weapons, but he raised a hand. "You've confessed," he said. "More than once, but never honestly. This is your last chance." The scarred man laughed. "You think words mean anything here?" "No," Father Brown said, "but truth does." He pulled the ring from his pocket and placed it on the table. "This is your legacy. Not God, not mercy, but fear." They didn't answer. "Carla found your names," he said. "Moira too. You silenced them, but the silence has an echo. He opened a small recorder, played Carla's voice, shaky, faint, but damning. "I know what you are," she had said. "I found the records, the money, the names. You can hide behind rituals and robes, but sin stinks, no matter how. You bless it." The police arrived 10 minutes later. Father Brown had called before entering. Enough time for the tape to roll. Enough time for the truth to be heard. The order was dismantled. Kearse turned state's witness. The old priest was defrocked, charged, convicted. The Red Moon closed, but not before one last service, a baptism of sorts, blood in the font, and then peace. Father Brown returned to St. Endymphna's, lit a candle, and prayed, because in the end, it wasn't crime he fought. It was the soul's hunger to justify evil, dressed in gold, cloaked in silence. And sometimes you had to bleed the lie before you could cleanse the truth. Chapter 8. The Bell That Rang Twice. The first time the bell rang that night, it was just after midnight, a single solemn toll that echoed across the empty pews of St. Dymphna's like a whisper from an open grave. Father Brown heard it clearly, though he was deep in the vestry preparing for a funeral the next day. An old parishioner, a widow who had once confessed more sorrow than sin. The bell above the chapel had not rung since the last funeral mass, and that had been nearly 3 weeks ago. Brown set the brass chalice down gently and stood still, listening. No wind, no storm, no stray cats, just silence again. Then the bell rang a second time. He moved slowly through the chapel, feet silent on the old stone floor, until he reached the front doors. He opened them onto the rain-slick street. Nothing. The fog was thick, pressing in close, curling around the iron fence like cigarette smoke around a guilty mouth. But someone had pulled the rope. And in this part of Westwood, bells didn't toll without a body attached. He found her sitting in the front pew, or rather, draped over it. A woman in a black coat, soaked from the rain, head bowed so low he couldn't see her face. One gloved hand clutched a small silver bell, the kind you might find in a hotel lobby or on a nurse's counter. Not from this church. This bell was personal. He knew without asking that she'd rung it. And now she was waiting. "I need sanctuary," she said, her voice raw, hoarse, from smoke or grief. "And maybe a little absolution." Father Brown stepped closer, noting the trembling in her shoulders, the faint smell of blood and something else. Gasoline. "The two don't always come together," he said gently. She lifted her head. Her face was pale, the makeup smeared into bruises, her lipstick kissed away by rain. But the eyes, those were clear, sharp, and watching him. "My name's Lila March. I'm not Catholic, if that matters." "It doesn't," he said. She dropped the bell on the pew. "But I think I just saw a man murdered, and I think I know who did it." He said nothing, just waited, as he always did. "He was a private detective," she continued. "Name was Talbot. He'd been following me. Said he was hired by my husband, or ex-husband. We're not divorced, but we're not exactly married either. Not since he disappeared last year." Father Brown blinked. "Disappeared?" Lila laughed without humor. "Said he was going, on business. Never came back. No funeral, no body, just gone. And Talbot, he thought I knew something, that I'd helped make him disappear." "And did you?" Brown asked calmly. "No," she said, with the edge of something sharper. "But maybe I should have." He sat beside her, keeping a small distance between them, and studied her hands. No ring, but a faint tan line where one had been. Her gloves were cheap but clean, and her coat, though soaked, was finely tailored. She wasn't someone who had fallen on hard times. She was someone who had chosen to walk among them. "I went to meet Talbot tonight," she said. "He said he had something, proof maybe, something about Martin. That's my husband. But when I got there, he was already dead, shot through the eye like an execution, and there was a bell on the floor next to him, just like this one." "Where?" "The Old Knox Hotel, room 213. Father Brown nodded slowly. "And you came here? You're the only one who'd believe me." "Why's that?" "Because everyone else already knows I'm guilty." It was just past 2 when Father Brown stepped into the Knox Hotel. The desk clerk was asleep, slumped behind the counter like a man in hiding from his own life. The hallways were yellow-lit and smelled of wet plaster and whiskey sweats. He climbed to the second floor, where the carpet muffled his steps, and the peeling wallpaper whispered other people's regrets. Room 213 was unlocked. Inside, the smell hit first: blood, cordite, the metallic ghost of violence. The body was still there. Talbot, face half missing, slumped in a wooden chair near the bed. A bottle of rye on the table, a half-filled glass, and next to it, another bell. The same kind. Father Brown didn't touch anything. He never did, but he looked, and looking was enough. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of surprise. Talbot had known whoever killed him, trusted them, or expected them. The shot had come clean from close range, and the glass hadn't spilled. He had never seen it coming. The drawer beside the bed held papers, receipts, a notepad with addresses and initials, and in the back, a photograph. A man smiling, hand on the shoulder of a woman who looked like Lila, but younger, less tired. The man was Martin March, dead a year, or supposedly. Father Brown returned to St. Dimphna's before dawn. Lila was still in the chapel, sitting in the dark, her hands clasped, as if in prayer, but her eyes fixed on the altar like it owed her answers. When he stepped in, she didn't flinch. "He's still alive," Brown said softly. "Your husband." She looked at him. "You're sure?" "Talbot had a photograph. Recent, and he wasn't following you. He was trying to find him. You were just the bait." "Then who killed him?" "That's the question," Brown said. "But I don't think it was you." She gave a hollow laugh. "You're the only one." "No," he said. "There's someone else. Someone who rang the bell." That evening, Detective Harris arrived with a face like a storm and a folder he didn't want to open. "Talbot's dead," he said, "shot in the eye. No witnesses, just a woman in a coat leaving the building 2 minutes before the shot. Your woman." Father Brown folded his hands. "She came straight here. She was frightened, shocked. So she says, so you say, but the rest of the world has questions. Like why she was meeting Talbot, why she never filed a missing persons report on her husband, why her name's on 3 insurance policies in Martin's name. She didn't kill him?" "No?" Harris raised an eyebrow. "Then who did?" Father Brown said nothing, but he was thinking of the bell, of the tone it made, high, sharp, precise, like a signal, and of the silence that followed it. That was when it came to him. The bell had rung twice, once at the church, once at the scene, a calling card, but not Lila's, Martin's. He found him the next day, hiding in plain sight. A bar down on Halberd Street, where the music was cheap and the patrons cheaper. A bartender remembered him. Said he went by Marcus, had a scar behind his left ear, played piano like a man trying to forget something. Father Brown waited until he returned. Martin didn't recognize him at first, then he did, and froze. "You're the priest," he said. "Yes," Brown replied, "and you're the ghost." Martin glanced around. "You shouldn't be here. I'm often where I shouldn't be. You don't understand." "Then help me," Brown said. "Start with the bell." Martin sat, hands trembling. "It was a signal. Between me and Talbot, when we worked together, it meant a setup, a frame job. I taught it to him. And he used it. He was trying to trap someone who wanted me dead." "Who?" Martin swallowed. "My brother." And there it was. Arthur March. A name that hadn't come up yet. Older, former city official, clean on paper, but with rumors clinging to him like ivy on a wall. Martin had taken the fall for something Arthur had done. A bribe, a fraud, maybe more. Talbot found out, Martin said. He was going to expose him. Arthur knew. That's why he killed him. And the bell? He rang it twice. Once for Talbot, once for me. He wanted to end it. Father Brown stood. "Then let's finish it." That night, at St. Dymphna's, the bell rang one last time, this time deliberately, loud, public, a summons. Arthur March came. He stepped into the chapel like he owned it, his suit crisp, his face carved from stone. Father Brown waited near the altar, a soft light casting shadows across his face. "You made a mistake," Arthur said. "You dragged my family into your nonsense." "No," Brown said. "Your family was already in the pit. I just lit a match. You can't prove anything." "I don't need to. Martin will." Arthur laughed. "You think he'll testify?" "No," Brown said. "He already has. The bell, the records, the photo. It's enough." Arthur took a step forward. "You're a fool." "Perhaps," Brown replied, "but it's the wise who forget that sin always wants an echo, and you just rang yours." Arthur lunged, but the police were already there. Harris had come, listening from the back pew. Arthur was arrested. Martin was placed under protection. Lila disappeared again, this time on her own terms, and Father Brown, he stood beneath the bell tower as the sun rose over Westwood. The bell above him was still, silent now, but if you listened closely, it had already said everything. Chapter 9. Ashes Behind the Altar. The fire started in the middle of the night, and like most things in this city, it didn't roar, it whispered. A slow-burning secret, rising behind the altar of St. Jude's, a half-forgotten parish on the edge of town where even God seemed to keep his distance. By the time the smoke was seen, the sacristy was already gone, and the chapel pews were collapsing under the weight of flame and ash. Father Brown stood outside the smoldering skeleton as firefighters hissed water through charred windows, the thick scent of incense and old wood replaced by something acrid and final. He watched without flinching. It wasn't the first church he'd seen go up in flames, and he doubted it would be the last. He wasn't called to the scene. He never was. But when a priest dies in a locked church and the fire is blamed on faulty wiring, there's usually more beneath the soot. Father Callahan had served at St. Jude's for 27 years. Quiet man, unassuming. The kind who kept his nose clean and his homilies shorter than the weather report. When they found his body in the sacristy, face down, surrounded by melted candle wax and burned linen. It looked like an accident, until they found the gun. It had been buried in the ash behind the altar, wrapped in what was left of a cassock, unfired, but the safety had been switched off, and the chamber was full. You don't bring a loaded pistol to midnight mass unless you expect company. The coroner called it smoke inhalation. Father Brown called it something else. He visited what was left of St. Jude's the next morning. The walls still stood, though the stained glass was shattered, and the roof let sunlight pour in like judgment. He moved through the ruins with care, stepping over scorched hymnals and half-melted chalices. The altar had cracked, split down the middle like a bad conscience. Behind it, in the brick recesses where the incense and sacrament wine had been kept, he found a metal box, fireproof, locked. It wasn't locked for long. He brought it back to St. Dymphna's, where the vestry was quiet and the tea still steeped slow. Inside the box were papers, a single envelope, burned around the edges but still legible. It was addressed to someone named Evelyn Drake. He knew the name. Most people in the city did, though few said it out loud. Evelyn Drake ran a charitable foundation on the surface, St. Gabriel's Aid Society. Beneath that surface was something else. Loans with interest rates sharp enough to draw blood. Connections to politicians, judges, anyone with a collar stiff enough to pretend they didn't see the knife in the other hand. She was elegance, dipped in arsenic, and her eyes could read a lie before you even breathed it. Father Brown found her at her downtown office, high above the city, where the glass glistened and nothing ever looked dirty. She didn't rise when he entered, just looked him over, like a tailor measuring a suit he didn't like. "I assume you're not here for a donation," she said. "No," he replied. "I'm here about Father Callahan." Her fingers stilled over the fountain pen. "How unfortunate. You knew him." "Of course. He sat on our advisory board, helped with the food drives." "Why?" "He left you a letter." That got her, just a flicker, in the corner of her mouth. She recovered quickly. "Let me see it." "I already did," Brown said. He was afraid, said someone had turned the church into a meeting point. Late-night deliveries, unrecorded funds, strange confessions. Said he'd stumbled into something that stank of more than sin. Evelyn smiled. "Priests are prone to drama." "Priests are prone to truth," Brown said, "though not always when it's convenient." She stood, walked to the window. "Whatever Callahan thought he saw, it wasn't connected to me." "I didn't say it was," Brown said softly, "but guilt is often fastest to speak." She turned, eyes sharp. "You think I had him killed?" "I think people die when they get too close to what others want buried, and I think your foundation's last audit was done by a man named Holtzman, who also died, heart attack they said, 2 days after visiting Callahan." Her silence was answer enough. "You're wasting your breath, Father. There's no proof, and without proof, even God has trouble getting a conviction." "God doesn't convict," Father Brown said. "He reveals." That night, the shadows pressed harder against the stained glass of St. Dymphna's. Brown lit the candles himself, one by one, until the nave glowed like an ember, refusing to die. He prayed, not for Callahan, who he believed was already heard, but for the living, who still ran from the voice inside that told them they'd gone too far. The next day, someone broke into the vestry. They didn't steal anything. Not the chalices, not the money, not even the locked drawer where Brown kept the papers. They left something instead. ash, a neat pile of it behind the altar, just like the box in St. Jude's, and in the middle of it, a bullet, clean, unfired, shined to a polish. It was a message. He didn't go to the police, not because he didn't trust them, but because some things required other tools. So he went to the one man who knew how the city's back alleys really breathed. Tommy Gresh, an informant with more scars than scruples. Tommy owed him a favor, maybe two. "Callahan?" Tommy said, hunched on a bar stool with a busted nose and a flask hidden in his coat. He wasn't just a priest, you know. Used to be a fixer, knew the books, ran numbers before he found the collar. You don't unlearn that. And he was doing that again. Maybe, or maybe he saw someone else doing it. St. Jude's started getting late-night drop-offs, cash, envelopes, guys in nice suits and soft shoes. Not your usual sinners. And Evelyn? Tommy snorted. She doesn't do the work. She signs the checks. There's a guy, though, Roman Tull, real estate, dirty as a sewer and half as honest. He's the one who met Callahan last. I heard they argued. Father Brown found Roman Tull at a half-empty jazz club where the music was too loud for the confessions it concealed. Tull was wide, sweaty, wore his shirt unbuttoned like a man who forgot he wasn't young anymore. He didn't rise when Brown approached, just raised one eyebrow. I thought priests stuck to funerals. I prefer to prevent them, Brown said. You here to talk about Callahan? He was afraid of something he thought you could stop. He was paranoid. He was burned, Brown said, alive, in his own church. Tull didn't blink. So what? He knew the risks. You swim with sharks, eventually something bites. You misunderstand, Brown said. Callahan wasn't afraid for himself. He was afraid for someone else. Tull frowned. Who? Brown stood. That's what I intend to find out. That someone else turned out to be a girl, 16, unnamed in the files, protected by the seal of confession and the fear she carried in her bones. But Brown found her, in a shelter where no one used last names and everyone flinched at loud noises. Her name was Laurie. She had cleaned at St. Jude's in exchange for shelter and food. She'd seen things, men in suits, envelopes passed, like sacrament, cash in the baptismal font, and Callahan, he'd protected her, hid her when things got rough, had started writing things down, planning to go public. They told him he was next, she whispered, said if he spoke, he'd burn. And so he did. The next day, Brown returned to Evelyn Drake's office. Alone, no police, no fanfare. Your silence is crumbling, he said, placing the ledger Callahan had kept on her desk. She flipped through it. Names, dates, amounts, codes. You think this damns me? No, Brown said, but it damns someone, and you've been trying to buy your way out of it ever since. Evelyn looked at him long. You'll never make this stick. No, he said, but sin always does. He left before she could answer. The police took her 2 days later. Not for murder, not yet, but for tax fraud. For the books. For the charity that was anything but. Roman Tull disappeared. Some said he was in Havana. Others said he was in pieces. Father Brown didn't care. He stood again in the ruins of St. Jude's, the ash still clinging to the corners like a memory that refused to blow away. He knelt behind the altar where the fire had started and said a prayer not for the guilty, but for those who tried too late to be innocent again. Sin, he thought, was never about crime. It was about hiding it, about burying it behind altars and cash and pious words. But the ashes always rise, and when they do, they leave a stain no fire can cleanse. Chapter 10. The Angel's Broken Wing. It was nearly 2 in the morning when the knock came, not timid, not frantic, but steady, like someone rehearsing a lie they were about to tell. Father Brown rose from his chair by the vestry stove, draping his threadbare coat over his shoulders as the cold night air slipped through the gaps in the stained glass. Outside, the city was soaked in rain and neon, the streets gleaming like the eyes of men who'd stopped praying. He opened the heavy wooden door and saw her standing there, in a halo of streetlight and cigarette smoke, mascara running, a gloved hand clutching the strap of a small leather purse like it held her life. She didn't introduce herself right away. Instead, she walked past him, into the chapel, and sat in the front pew, beneath the statue of St. Michael. The archangel towered above her with his sword raised, but the woman didn't seem to notice. She looked like someone who'd once believed in salvation, only to find it carried interest rates and bloodstains. When she finally spoke, her voice was low and cracked, but not broken. "They called her the Angel," she said. "The one who used to sing here, every Christmas Eve." Father Brown nodded slowly. "Angela Duval." "Yes." She looked up at him now, eyes fierce. "She's gone. 2 nights now. No one's looking. No one cares. Except you." "I owe her," the woman said. "She saved me once, years ago, pulled me out of something ugly, and now she's vanished." "Have you gone to the police?" Her smile was dry and bitter. "The police in this town don't chase missing women, not unless they're rich or carry guns." "And what do you want from me?" "I want you to find her, or find whoever's lying about where she is." She finally gave her name. Celeste Bishop. Once a nightclub singer, now just a name etched in faded posters and whispered regret. She said Angela had been working at the Blue Halo, a jazz bar with a reputation for laundering more than melodies, owned by Victor Bellamy, a man with enough lawyers to wallpaper a mansion and enough enemies to fill the pews of a cathedral. Angela had been singing there 3 nights a week, cash in hand, no contracts, no questions, until 2 nights ago when she left through the back door and didn't come home. Father Brown listened, asked little, and finally offered a faint nod. "Tell me what she was running from." Celeste hesitated, then pulled a torn photograph from her purse. It showed Angela smiling under bright lights, a bruise just peeking out from the edge of her sleeve. Next to her stood Bellamy, grinning wide, a hand on her shoulder like a leash. "She tried to leave," Celeste said. "Said she had something. Proof. Said she was going to expose him." "Expose what?" "I don't know. She wouldn't say, just that it would burn the whole place down." Father Brown studied the photo. Then perhaps someone made sure she stayed quiet. The Blue Halo sat on the edge of the old riverfront, its windows fogged with years of smoke, and its sign flickering with false warmth. Father Brown walked in uninvited the next night, passing beneath a cascade of saxophone wails and perfume. Bellamy was at the bar, drink in hand, rings flashing like brass knuckles in disguise. He spotted Father Brown the moment he stepped inside. "Well, well," Bellamy said. "Didn't know we had a parish program for sinners." "We all qualify," Brown said, mildly. "Some just hide it better." Bellamy laughed, motioned to a seat. "You're not here for the music." "I'm looking for Angela Duval." "Lot of people looking for her," Bellamy said. "Fewer actually want to find her." "And you?" Bellamy shrugged. She's a voice, a talent. Sad if she's gone. But that's the thing about angels. They fly away when you least expect. She left something behind, Brown said. Something dangerous. Bellamy's expression tightened. Just for a second. You think I hurt her? He asked, voice too smooth. I think someone wanted her silent. Bellamy leaned in, voice dropping. You don't know the kind of people she ran with. You think I'm bad. I'm a choir boy compared to some of the men who heard her sing. And yet, Father Brown said, you're the one answering the questions. He left the club soon after, Bellamy's gaze on his back like a blade that hadn't been drawn yet. Outside, the air was thick with mist and exhaust. Walked slowly back to St. Dymphna's, thinking not about where Angela was, but who she had trusted with whatever secret she had uncovered. Secrets, after all, were like debts in this city, passed around, collected with interest, and never forgiven. The next day, a package arrived. No return address. Inside was a cassette tape, labeled in faded ink. Rehearsal. December. 18 AD. He played it in the vestry, the hiss of the tape giving way to piano chords and a voice that cut through the silence like a confession. Angela, singing softly, then laughing. Then, near the end, a conversation, barely audible, over the music. He said they'd never find out, laundering it through the choir fund. Victor doesn't know I have this. A thud, a gasp, and silence. Father Brown rewound it twice. She hadn't just found dirt. She'd found betrayal. From someone close. Someone in the church. He went to the diocese, asked quiet questions. Found louder resistance. The name that kept surfacing was Monsignor Dellon, head of the Cathedral Council, keeper of the choir fund, and a man whose collar was too clean for the kind of city he served. Brown had always found him polite, affable, and utterly unreadable, the kind of man who confessed only what was already public knowledge. That evening, Brown paid him a visit. Dellon met him in his office, walls lined with books and awards, a painting of the Virgin behind his desk, like a witness to better lies. I heard you've been asking about Angela, Dellon said. She was part of your choir. You signed the checks. Donations, Father. Designated giving. Was some of it laundered? Dellon's lips tightened. That's a dangerous accusation. It's not an accusation, Brown said softly. It's a wound that hasn't healed. And wounds always smell before they show. Dellon stood. You're meddling in something you don't understand. I understand sin, Brown said. It never stays buried, Dellon said. Nothing more. But when Father Brown left, he knew he'd struck the nerve. Angela was found the next day, barely alive, dumped in an alley behind the old seminary. Bruised, burned, but breathing. She was taken to the hospital, silent at first, afraid. But when she saw Father Brown, she whispered one name. Dellon. The story came in pieces. Dellon had discovered she had the tape. He'd confronted her, tried to buy her silence. When she refused, he arranged for her disappearance. Bellamy had helped, but it was Dellon who had orchestrated the cover-up, using the church as a shield, the choir fund as a funnel for Bellamy's money. Harris took the case. Dellon was arrested during Mass. Bellamy tried to flee. He didn't get far. Angela testified. Celeste vanished again, this time with peace in her eyes. And the choir fund was shut down. The books opened. The ashes of corruption finally swept out from under the altar. Father Brown stood alone in the chapel that night, listening to the wind through the broken pane near the choir loft, The statue of St. Michael still stood, sword raised. But one wing was cracked, chipped at the tip. Even angels break, he thought, especially the ones who sing too loud. Chapter 11. A Sermon for the Guilty. The rain had started before dawn and hadn't let up once. It sheeted over the cracked sidewalks of Westwood like a dirty baptism, making the streets shine and the alleys hiss. It was a bad kind of rain. Sharp, unrelenting, the sort that kept the honest indoors and sent the sinners slinking toward the places where light didn't reach. Father Brown moved through the downpour like a man immune to weather. A small figure in a heavy coat, collar turned up, hat pulled low. His shoes were soaked through, but he didn't seem to notice. He'd just finished hearing morning confessions at St. and Dymphna's and was locking the vestry when the phone rang. It was Detective Harris, voice gravel-thick with cigarette smoke and irritation. There'd been a murder. Not just a murder, a statement. The victim was Raymond Carr, a prosecutor with a reputation for chasing gangsters and letting priests off easy. His body had been found in a confession booth at the old St. Teresa's Chapel, which hadn't been used in years. His throat had been slit, and a Bible had been placed in his lap, opened to the book of James. Be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourselves. The chapel had been shuttered since the fire last winter, and its pews were lined with dust and old sin. The booth where Carr had been found was scorched around the edges, like someone had tried to burn the past out of the place before writing their message in blood. Father Brown arrived before the coroner. He moved slowly, eyes wandering over the cracked walls, the stained floor, the heavy silence that always followed a violent death. The Bible was indeed open to James. Carr's blood had soaked through half the pages. He'd been killed sitting down, kneeling even. There was no sign of a struggle, just compliance, acceptance. Harris was pacing outside, coat pulled tight against the rain, his shoes leaving muddy prints on the marble steps. "You ever seen anything like this?" he asked. Father Brown nodded slowly. "Yes. Really. In a way. Sometimes people come to confession not to be forgiven, but to justify the guilt they already planned to ignore. You think Carr was meeting someone here? I think he was summoned." And he answered. Back at St. Dymphna's, Brown sat in his vestry study, tea going cold beside him. He was thinking, Carr had enemies, too many to count, but not many with the flair to stage a killing as a kind of mock sermon. Whoever did it wasn't just sending a message. They were drawing a line between justice and hypocrisy. That wasn't gangster work. That was personal. That was righteous. And righteousness in the hands of the angry is just sin with better posture. The next day, she came. She was tall, in a funeral black dress that clung like a secret, with a veil that did nothing to soften the sharpness of her voice. "Your Father Brown?" "I am. I heard you're good at finding things." "I try to be." She sat without asking. "I'm Madeline Carr, Raymond's wife. I'm sorry for your loss." She laughed once. "He was a bastard, but he was my bastard." Brown waited. "I know you were at the scene," she continued. "So you know this wasn't a mugging or a hit. It was something else." "Yes. He told me last week he was meeting someone. Said it was confidential, legal but messy." "Did he say who?" "No. But he was scared. More than usual." She reached into her bag and slid an envelope across the table. "He got this the day before he died. I found it in his coat." Father Brown opened it. One sentence typed in cold, even ink. Come and confess, or burn with the rest. There was no signature, just a symbol, two crossed nails beneath a single eye. He'd seen that symbol once before. Years ago, it had belonged to a group that called itself the True Penitents. They were zealots, dressed as reformers, men and women who believed the justice system wasn't enough, that God had given them the right to punish those who confessed but never repented. They disappeared after a scandal in the East District when a judge was found hanged in his own courtroom. No arrests, just rumors. But they had left their mark, crossed nails and an eye, a reminder that they were watching. Do you think it's them? Madeline asked. If it is, they've started again. And Carr was their first sermon. Then, who's next? Brown didn't answer. Not because he didn't know, but because the truth was still forming in the dark places behind his eyes. He asked Madeline a final question. Did your husband ever go to confession? She blinked. Not in years, but someone knew he'd come if they asked. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The next body was found 2 nights later. It was an alderman named Giles Fenley, crooked as a paperclip and twice as bent. He was found in the sanctuary of St. Mark's, hanging by a rope made from rosary beads, his shoes missing, his mouth stuffed with communion wafers. This time, the Bible was open to Matthew. Many will say to me, Lord, Lord, and I will declare to them, I never knew you. Another note, same symbol. Come and confess, or burn with the rest. This time, Harris wasn't just rattled. He was scared. Not for his life. He'd seen enough death to be numb. But for the city. When people start dying in churches, you don't just have a killer. You have a prophet. Father Brown visited the third church, St. Sebastian's. He didn't wait for another body. He waited for the killer. He sat in the front pew until midnight, the silence wrapping around him like an old robe. He prayed, not loudly, just lips moving, heart quiet. And at 12:15, someone slipped into the chapel behind him. Footsteps light, deliberate. A figure moved into the second confessional. The curtain slid shut. Forgive me, Father, the voice said, soft and male, for I have sinned. What is your sin? Brown asked, barely above a whisper. I believed the guilty deserved absolution. I believed mercy mattered more than truth. And now I believe sin is a debt, and the wages must be paid. Father Brown, let silence stretch. You've killed 2 men, he said. 2 unrepentant men. And a third? Maybe, unless he listens. Who? There was a pause. You. Father Brown turned his head slightly. Why me? Because you speak of forgiveness. But you let monsters walk. You knew what Carr was, what Fenley did. You knew, and you did nothing. I prayed for them, Brown said. And now you'll pray for me? If you want me to. There was no answer. When Father Brown stepped out, the other booth was empty. No one saw the killer leave. He gave the name to Harris the next day, not because he had a face, but because he had a confession. The voice was familiar. The cadence, the rhythm. It was a man named Philip Ashcroft, once a seminarian, now a private investigator. He had vanished 3 years ago after a scandal involving the bishop's office and a missing girl. No charges, no explanations, just gone. Father Brown tracked him to an abandoned mission on the edge of the city. Ashcroft was there, waiting. You always were better than the rest, Ashcroft said. No, Brown replied, just more stubborn. You let them go. All of them. Carr, Fenley, the bishop, you let them live. And you judge them? I did what the church wouldn't. You built a pulpit out of corpses. Ashcroft stood, pacing. They confessed, and nothing changed. So I became change. Father Brown stepped closer. That's not justice. That's revenge. Ashcroft's hands trembled. You think God weeps for them? I think he weeps for you. The police came. Ashcroft didn't run. He surrendered with the quiet of a man who thought he'd done right. They cuffed him, he whispered to Father Brown. You were supposed to be next. I still might be, Brown said softly, but not from you. He returned to St. Dymphna's that night, where the candlelight flickered like stars refusing to die. He wrote the sermon for Sunday, not about wrath, not about punishment, but about the weight of knowing, and the grace of choosing not to carry it alone. Chapter 12. Truth in the Fog. The fog had rolled in heavy that night, thick and wet, like it had soaked up every lie ever told in the city, and was now breathing it back into the streets. The gas lamps along Mercer flickered like half-lit promises, and even the neon signs on Langford's bar barely made a dent in the grey. The city was quiet in that way only the guilty can appreciate, muted still, and waiting for someone to knock over the first domino. Father Brown walked with the same shuffle he always had, a slow, patient gait that made him look like he had nowhere to be. But he was always going somewhere, and on nights like this, the destination usually involved death. The knock came just after midnight. 3 soft raps on the chapel's side door. Not the front, never the front. That would have been too easy, too public. Father Brown opened it without a word and found her standing there in the fog, tall and sharp in silhouette, a cigarette trembling between her fingers and a scent of lilac and something more dangerous on her breath. Father, she said, brushing past him like she owned the place. I need help. He didn't ask her name, not at first. Names were fragile things in a city like this. They cracked under pressure. She sat in the front pew, crossed her legs like a woman used to courtroom floors and crime scene tape, and stared up at the crucifix like she was daring it to answer back. It's my sister, she said. She's missing. Her name's Estelle. Estelle DeWitt Brown said nothing. He just watched the cigarette burn down to her knuckles. She's a dancer at the Eden Club, the kind they don't advertise. I've heard of it, Brown said quietly. I figured you had. She stubbed the cigarette out on the pew rail. She called me 2 nights ago, said someone was following her. She sounded scared. Estelle never sounds scared. And since then? Nothing. No word, no police report, no body, just Fog Brown tilted his head. And you? I'm Camille. Camille DeWitt. I'm not a saint, Father, but I know when something stinks. He nodded slowly. And you came here because the cops won't touch the Eden Club, because the owner's got friends who wear gold shields and eat from silver plates, and because I heard you're the only man in this city who digs for truth and doesn't bury it after. Father Brown didn't respond right away. He looked out at the chapel, empty, but for the sound of dripping water from a cracked pipe, the kind of silence that always came before someone started confessing to the wrong person. I'll look into it, he said, but you should know. Truth doesn't always save people. She smiled faintly. Neither does silence. The Eden Club looked like sin wearing perfume, red curtains, gilded columns, shadows so thick you could lose your name in them. Father Brown arrived in his priest's coat, the only man there not wearing a smirk or carrying a flask. The maitre d' blinked at him like he was hallucinating, then waved him through when he said the words Estelle DeWitt. The owner was a man named Rainer Voss, heavy-set, gold chain, cologne thick enough to drown in. He smiled at Father Brown like a man greeting death and hoping to bluff his way out of it. "Can I help you, Father? I'm looking for a girl. You and everyone else. Her name's Estelle." Voss's smile didn't change, but his eyes did. "Just a flicker. Haven't seen her. She worked here. Lots of girls work here. They come and go. She was scared. Aren't they all?" Brown looked around the club. The dancers, the bar staff, the security men in the corners pretending not to watch. Then he turned back to Voss. "Fear makes people disappear. Guilt makes them come back. I don't have time for parables, Father." "No," said Brown, "but you'll make time for judgment." He left before Voss could respond, knowing the weight of his presence would linger longer than any argument. Back in the fog, the night seemed quieter, heavier, like something was pressing on the edges of the city and waiting for it to confess. Camille was waiting by the chapel steps, coat pulled tight around her shoulders, eyes sharp as broken glass. "He knows something," she said. "Yes. Then what now?" "Now," Brown said, "we find who else was watching her." It took 3 days, 2 favors, and 1 quiet threat. But he found the name. Detective Fallon. Badge number 311. Assigned to Vice, but mostly worked as a janitor for the powerful, cleaning up messes no one wanted reported. Brown found him outside a diner near the precinct, sipping coffee and looking like he hadn't slept since the last honest paycheck. "You're the priest," Fallon said, not looking up. "And you're the man who looked away." Fallon sighed. "You think you're special? You think truth matters in this city? It doesn't. Not when the men at the top own the paper and the pen." "Truth writes itself," Brown said. "In blood, if necessary." Fallon glanced at him. "You don't scare easy." "I scare often," Brown said, "but fear doesn't stop me." Fallon stared at his cup. She was in trouble. Estelle started asking questions, wanted to blow the lid off Voss's protection racket. Names, dates, said she had proof. Where? She said she gave it to someone, said if anything happened to her, it would find its way out. To who? Fallon finally looked at him. You. The package arrived that night. No return address. Inside was a small cassette, a ledger torn from a spiral notebook, and a single Polaroid. Estelle, bruised but alive, holding a thumb drive like it was a holy relic. Brown sat in the vestry and listened to the recording. Estelle's voice, scared but clear, laying out the network. Voss, Fallon, 2 judges, and a bishop with stained hands. She named names, she gave details, she told the truth, and then she vanished. Camille cried when she heard it. Not the kind of tears that fall politely, but the kind that tear open wounds you thought had scabbed over. She's dead, isn't she? She's missing, Brown said, but the city will hear her now. The story hit the papers 2 days later. Brown made sure of it. No names were changed. No details were spared. The fallout was fast. Voss was arrested fleeing across state lines. Fallon resigned before Internal Affairs could. Knock. The bishop denied everything, but the photos spoke louder than sermons. And Estelle, they found her a week later, drugged but alive, in a storage room beneath the Eden Club. She'd been locked away when the story started spreading. Forgotten by the guilty, saved by the stubborn. Brown visited her in the hospital. She was pale, quiet, but she smiled when she saw him. I didn't think you'd believe me. Truth is always believable, Brown said, even when it's buried in fog. She reached for his hand. Thank you. He didn't answer, just sat with her as the city outside kept breathing its slow, heavy sighs. Camille disappeared again, back into the smoke and the noise. But Brown knew she was out there, watching, remembering. And the fog, it lifted for a while.